Hello everybody and welcome. My name's James Harding. I'm the editor and co-founder of Tortoise. This is our newsroom. We were set up just over 3 years ago now to try and take a different approach to journalism, a different approach to the news. As you can guess from the name, our thinking is take a little more time, go slowly, and hopefully you'll come to a better understanding that might help us mend things. And in this case, the subject in front of us is fundamentally growth. How are we going to drive the growth of the UK? We at Tortoise have been lucky for a couple of years now. Just at the very beginning of the pandemic, we were put in touch with the CBI, who said, look, can you help us try and bring people together so that we can understand what's really happening as COVID hits businesses across the UK? And it was an amazing thing, I have to say, for us to begin to learn from that extraordinary network of businesses who are members of the CBI what was really happening and try and put them in touch with what the CBI was doing and what government was doing. Of course, it's been a long couple of years for everyone. And by the end of last year, we were rather excitedly beginning to think about a different vision of the decade to come, the 2020s. And as Tony Danker took over as the Director General of the CBI, the focus was really on how are you going to drive up growth in the UK, and in particular, regional competitiveness. And with that in mind, Matthew Fell, the Policy Director of the CBI, and us at Tortoise started thinking about how would we really understand the possibilities and the potential of clusters. This idea that there would be centres of excellence in places across the UK that would be competitive, not just within the country, but globally. And with that in mind, we realised that there was no way of doing that unless you properly entered upon an exercise in listening. And the reason we're doing this together is that at Tortoise, our basic way of trying to do journalism is what we call the think-in. It's essentially an open news meeting. If you've ever worked in a newsroom, you know that people in newsrooms don't really ask questions. They just more quickly express opinions. And what we want is you to express your opinions. We've come here in the first of a series of think-ins that we're doing. I'm doing some, Hashim Mohammed is going to be doing a bunch of others. We're going to be doing them across the UK, in Cheltenham, in Glasgow, in Birmingham, and a bunch of places that I've now rudely forgotten. We're going to do them across the UK. And the aim is that we're going to be getting together in rooms like this, bring together a kind of stellar gang that I'm going to introduce in a moment, and try to draw as much wisdom as possible from the room. So if you feel as though you're involved in a kind of national exercise in intellectual property theft, you're right. We want your best ideas to inform the CBI's thinking on clusters so it can in turn inform what the government is setting out to do. And I'm looking forward to hearing from George Freeman on exactly what the government is doing on that front. For those of you who expect to see Tony Danker, so was I, and more to the point, so was he. Unfortunately, the poor man has been struck ill, which feels, I know, very 2021 to everyone, but he had to pull out at the last minute. But instead, we are lucky that Matthew Fell, as you've done before, Matthew has stepped in for Tony. We're joined by George Freeman, the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation is something we're going to talk about, and by Jo Bertram, who is the MD of Virgin Media O2's business, and who very kindly, Jo has been central to helping us get this whole thing up and running and off the ground. Before I sort of give Matthew a kind of light dusting in terms of questions, Matthew, do you want to just sort of set out what the CBI's ambitions are here and what we're trying to do at the beginning of this process?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks, James, and thanks everybody for joining us. It's absolutely brilliant to have so many of our members and our stakeholders to share your insights with us. It's brilliant, Minister, that you've given us your time. Jo, thanks for all the support from you and the team at Virgin Media O2 Business, and James, your colleagues at Tortoise as well. And huge apologies on behalf of Tony that he's not here in person. James, like you, until around about 9:45 this morning, I too was expecting Tony to be in that chair. So let's see how we go. Strap yourselves in, I think, is the answer. James, just look, in terms of what we are trying to attempt to do here, I think, like government, business has got a huge stake and a desire to do levelling up around the country really, really well. And our sort of hypothesis goes something like this, that you need a heavy dose of private sector-led investment in a place because you get high-quality sectors, you get high-quality firms, you get high-quality jobs going on in a location. If those are all the sort of ingredients, we think the best recipe to do that is through economic clusters. They bring together people in a place with a common shared interest and goal that people can unify. So firstly, what on earth is a cluster? Well, I think it is that collaboration, people feeling like they both collaborate but also they compete. They can spark off one another, they spur one another onto greater heights, and they bring something of a sort of X factor where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's kind of what we think of as an economic cluster, James, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the conversation. But then it's not just the cluster itself that helps with the whole levelling up agenda, because what do you know, when you get that going on, then all of a sudden you get adjacent industries going on. So the professional services, the financial services and so on crowd in too because they want a bit of a part of it. And then all of a sudden you get the spillover effects going on as well. So the retailers, the car showrooms, all of the sort of food and drink industry and so on, they benefit too because it all ripples out. And that is how we think you get a real contribution to levelling up. And then in terms of what are we trying to do here at the CBI? Well, today marks the start of the series, James, that you talked about, this Think-Ins. We're looking to hoover up all the expertise and the insights that are already going on around the country. I think the government have mapped this. We've had a crack at mapping it. We reckon there's something in the order of 30 plus really exciting economic clusters going on around the country today, with the potential for many more as well. So we're looking to hoover up those insights about what has worked and equally where are the challenges and what is not working so well now, so that we can attempt to codify those. That's the thinking idea. In parallel with that, we're investing in people on the ground in a couple of demonstrator cluster areas. Our first one is going to be in the Humber, working with the Zero Carbon Humber Consortium. We've got some of those in the room, some of those online. We'll say a little bit more about that as part of broader efforts in the Humber later on today. And then we're trying to capture all of those success factors in a playbook that says this is how you get high quality, high growth economic clusters going vibrant around the country. And if we can codify that and share those learnings and get everybody else enjoying in those successes, that's what we're aiming for.
And I hope we will come back and talk about the Humber, partly because I think it'll help us kind of get to the reality of what a cluster is and what it isn't. I wondered, George, whether I can start with you though, if you like, because actually we were just talking here. There's a brilliant piece from William Hague in the Times today, which is really an argument for George Freeman, as far as I can see. It says, let's really, but let's get behind a policy at scale of innovation in the UK economy. Matthew just mentioned 30 clusters. You know, let's not pretend that we've just come up with a new idea. This is something that's kind of actually the government's been working on. So should we just start from where we are? Do you want to spell out what the current position is and where you hope we'll get to in the next couple of years?
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you for putting this together. I get to do a lot of these, and I'm looking, you've got a pretty stellar audience here. There's not many problems we can't solve. I'm very conscious several of you have heard me say this before, so forgive me, and I'm working on the Blair Playbook. Say it 1,000 times and you might start to get through. But for those of you who haven't heard me speak, I mean, my background here is 15 years of tech economy, venture capital in the 90s when it was easy, 50 million fund, first UK biotech startup fund, then 4 years running an AI, early AI as a Flymo. It was an algorithm really chucked at the pharmacopoeia of failed drugs, reprofiling them, repatenting them, and we sold it to Takeda. And then I became a noisy advocate of a slightly different model of UK bioscience value capture. The spin out, get rich quick model, I mean, can be amazing. But if we over-rely on that, I think we'll lose a lot of value. So I spent 5-6 years setting up a little consulting corporate finance business, putting together deep industry and university collaborations all around the country. So everyone always says, oh, you had a career in Cambridge, didn't you? Well, yeah, but actually putting together the Scottish 100 million wire 4 hospital collaboration showed me the power of some of what Scotland was doing on really deep digital health science, putting together UCL partners. And you see the incredible breadth of science in London, which is not often thought of as a science city. So I come from And I've sat in meetings as an entrepreneur in the Cambridge area, listening to government ministers tell me how they've created all the jobs, and it used to drive me insane. So let me just say, we don't create jobs. People who take risks create jobs, and our job is to make that easier. So my definition of cluster, which comes from my former chairman, Andy Richards, one of the Cambridge Angels, but it's good. A cluster, he defines as a place, it's a low-risk place to persuade your partner and family to move with you in pursuit of a job in a high-risk sector. And what that means is, darling, we're moving to Cambridge. If this biotech firm goes bust, don't worry, there are plenty of others. And the education system's great. It's a lovely place to live. It's an important point, actually, that clusters are shaped by the people who take decisions to go there. The definition I've put at the heart of our mission is a cluster is a place where people take risks in pursuit of opportunities. Government normally works in threes. I think we can cope with 4 for this one. And basically, my thesis is, in a cluster, there'll be something holding it back. It'll either be a lack of the right sort of people, or a lack of skills. There'll be a lack of opportunities, or there'll be a lack of people able to take risks, or the risks are too high, or there won't be enough opportunities. And what we need to do is not just make announcements about them, but try and understand what is holding each cluster back and then let it go. Let me just to sort of close, on my sort of whiteboard, and I framed the mission, and it's the first time we've had a science minister who's a venture capitalist, and there's a reason for that. We have made a decision, and I've been battering any prime minister as they come and go on this for 15 years, but finally we've decided, mainly because of the scale of the emergency, I mean, a crash in 2007-8, austerity, a Brexit vote, political logjam, a pandemic, and then a war, has, I think, woken the country up to the fact that you can't just run a global service economy with a very heavy reliance on trickle down from London, because the trickle isn't enough and it hasn't gone far enough, and a lot of people feel very left behind, and they're voting for change. And so I'm proud. It's been a tumultuous period, but the government, Prime Minister, Chancellor, Cabinet, have committed to a really substantial shift in the economic model from being a service economy with deep science in silos and occasional innovation when somebody thick-skinned enough to break through a dysfunctional ecosystem can make it work, to a science, technology and research economy with amazing restaurants, culture. And that is a sort of 10-year program. It's a big shift. Just to give you an idea of, we have to put some metrics on it. The OECD average for R&D economy, 2.4%, which is why that's so totemic in the science world. If you want to be a superpower, I'd argue you probably want to be in the upper end. Israel's at 4.8, Switzerland's at 3.6, 2.4 the average. We're at 1.7. So we've been doing amazing science on a shoestring, really, which is a testament to the quality of our deep science base. So we've committed to go to 2.4. That's from 14 billion a year to 22 billion a year in the next 5 years. That's quite an increase. Bear in mind, China's at $240 billion a year, America $180 billion ex-defense, Germany's at 50, 60. So the real challenge is, how are we going to be a superpower on relatively small global money? And my operating thesis is 2 sides of the whiteboard. Science superpower defined as world-class science, UK science and technology helping solve global challenges, attracting R&D. If we can help feed 9 billion mouths, help prevent the ice caps melting, understand the oceans, high space, then we will attract a lot of money, embed our science in open career research community, so we're open to everybody, and we help teach young Russian and young Chinese scientists how good science is done. That's really reform of our ecosystem and making UKRI and the universities the world's best and most agile funding system. The real challenge is the right-hand side, the innovation nation piece. I don't think you can be a superpower unless you are also adopting innovation, using it, procuring it, regulating it, testing it. So the mission there is, look, as the world goes through agriculture, industrial revolutions, technology revolutions, Britain's got a chance to attract a lot of capital to the D of the R&D economy, to take technology out, develop products and services, use our regulatory freedoms post-Brexit to create the digital test beds of tomorrow, where we test the autonomous vehicles, we test the agri-tech crops. We give innovators the data that allows them to go global, and they can raise money here in the city. So there's a whole bunch of things we're doing. The cluster piece is the right-hand side of my whiteboard. It's the key. If we do all of that and we don't change the lives of people all around the country, they won't vote for it. But much more importantly, if you really want to be an innovation nation, I would argue you've got to keep the golden triangle golden. And the big battle, intellectual battle I've had with my great friend, Comrade Gove, was, look, Michael, we won't level up by moving the Golden Triangle north. We'll level up by building the Golden Triangles, the clusters all around the country. And so the big change of policy on this in Bays, and by the way, CBI are working with me and David Bickerton and the team in Bays on this, is a really big shift. We want to move from a world where you wheel the minister out to give a sort of cut a ribbon and congratulate myself on my own announcement every Friday, about 32 minutes from the office. We clear the diary and we've mapped, there are about 30 clusters around the country, from the Newquay Spaceport to the South Coast Marine Tech corridor, to the North Wales Energy Corridor, to the Norwich Agri-Tech cluster. You get the idea, all around the country. You can make a case for 45. Well, we've picked 30 because they're identifiable. None of them are square, round, or triangular. They don't fit in a constituency or a county. And we're now pulling together digital mapping of what they look like, how fast they're growing. And then we're going to try and make some strategic interventions to support them. So it's absolutely key. If we don't do that, we'll just have a golden triangle glowing in the south, and we won't actually change the economy. And the big policy, we've created 3 big innovation accelerators, one in Glasgow, one in Manchester, Greater Manchester, and one in the West Midlands. Michael and I would like 33, but we'll start with 3. And we're now working our way around the other 27. I'm on cluster tour 8, and each one I'm taking the top brass from Bays, UKRI, Innovate UK, KTN, the Levelling Up Group. And we're doing 7 or 8 meetings in each Friday, getting right under the bonnet and trying to work out what we can do to really help. So I think this is completely key to our success.
And George, just, in terms of everyone in the room and everyone who's going to engage in this process, what have you not got in government now? What do you need to understand better? What feedback and inputs do you need from people here so that you do it well?
There's 2 I'd love to flag. One is the data is all over the place, usual stuff in government. We've got quite a nice Bays data set that you can click on and go cluster, and it'll tell you all the ways Bays thinks about where we allocate money. UKRI can produce you a list of all the places where we fund research, which they can cut by geography if you ask them to, but it's not. And then Innovate UK have got... So if government tried to solve this problem, we'd spend 3 years coming up with a clunky website that doesn't work. If we unleash the power of UK innovators, to me, there's a skunk works, there's a weekend project where you just pull together the databases and produce something that you can look at and go, those are the 30 clusters, those are the next 10, but here are the 30. Some are red, some are orange, some are green, some are growing. Click on them and you just see basically what's holding them back. I think we could do that in an office like this for a weekend with some really good Shoreditch and London and tech.
It's at your disposal. We'll bring in some sandwiches and biscuits.
There you go. That's the big one, I think.
I'm going to come back, Matthew and George, to you in a moment, and I'm going to start sort of, I hope, hearing from people in the room. I am serious. What we really do want to do is hear from as many people as possible in the course of the just under hour that we have together. But Jo, I just want to understand from sort of Virgin Media O2 business's point of view. There's an argument that clusters might even feel a little old-fashioned because actually the beauty of working remotely is you can do it from anywhere. So what's your thinking about the relationship between connectivity and clusters?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, thanks for having us here, and great to see such alignment between the government thinking and also the CBI work in this important area. I mean, we've definitely seen that the digital sector has been growing faster than any other in the UK for many years, and that companies that really embrace digital grow faster than the ones that don't. Our own research has showed if we really invested in digital infrastructure over the next 20 years, we could add something like £200 billion to the economy. And also remote working alone has the power to release 4 million people into the workforce that currently can't contribute today. So we're really passionate about the role that digital connectivity can play, and that's obviously our bread and butter. At Virgin Media O2 Business, we work with public sector, businesses of all shapes and sizes to provide that connectivity to support their growth and transformation. I think digital connectivity is absolutely critical when we talk about regional growth. Last year, Oxford Analytica did a digital index of OECD countries based on broadband speed and mobile and fixed coverage and usage. And the good news is that our engagement had improved over time, But the less good news is we were number 8 in that list, behind countries like Denmark and Sweden and Spain. And they assessed that actually, if we could be a leader in that index by 2026, we'd add 1% to GDP growth and create 500,000 jobs. And that growth would have to come from outside London. So you'd see they assessed the biggest growth in the northwest, in the east of England, in the West Midlands, and in Scotland. So I think there's a huge amount we can do. Some of the biggest conclusions that we come to from that is, firstly, around policies to support the build-out of digital connectivity. It's critical that companies like ours and others can invest and build as quickly as possible. It's not the easiest investment environment in the UK. Secondly, I think there's more that we can do collectively between private and public sector to help encourage digital adoption. There are lots of companies, particularly as you go out into the regions, that haven't yet got those skills. And there's lots, I think, more that the government can do, but also that the private sector can do to encourage that. And then finally, digital inclusion. So especially as we move across the country, for it to be fair and inclusive for everyone, we need to make sure that we can put those skills, the connectivity, the devices into the hands of everyone. So over the last 12 months in our community calling initiatives, we've donated 10,000 phones and £1 million of data in terms of a national data bank to help give people access to skills and the connectivity they need. To the other part of your question about clusters, I think it's really interesting, the return post-COVID. I don't think many businesses have really figured out what it looks like yet. Yeah. Certainly for ourselves, and we talk to many of our customers, a lot of people are still figuring it out, and there's every extreme from fully return to the office and fully remote. And a lot of that depends also on the type of industry. You know, something like manufacturing requires more in presence than a knowledge business or a technology business. But I wonder if there is an extension to some of the physical clusters where digital connectivity can enable more of a remote ecosystem as well.
So why don't we start with, actually, we've done a decent job, I think, at starting with, like, what is a cluster? I like both definitions. Let's have a go at what makes for a successful cluster, and given I'm a journalist and you're in a newsroom, let's also discuss what makes for an unsuccessful cluster, where the mistakes happen and what goes wrong. George, do you want to go first? What would the key things you look at? Because I'm quite struck by your point about people and skills. You didn't mention necessarily capital. You didn't mention necessarily kind of infrastructure. I'd love to know, when you look at those 30, what you think are the key ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, a place in which people take risks in pursuit of opportunities, quite often the barriers may be there's a lack of capital, early angel finance, which is meaning there aren't enough opportunities. So right. I think capital is key, and infrastructure is often a huge barrier to the place. I mean, I'll give you a good example. In my part of the world, Cambridge, you all know about, the biggest traffic jam visible from space. It takes you 2 hours to drive 2 miles. It's not sustainable. Big problem, actually. We didn't plan for the growth of the cluster. So we're now pouring houses in the triangle between the M11, A11, A14. And they're quite well built. It's a Nordic cycling city, amazing. But we do have to think about growth and how we make it sustainable and a place that people still want to move to. But down the road, down the Norwich corridor, the Cambridge-Norwich corridor, I mean, Norwich, 22,000 research scientists on the Norwich Research Park. It's a world leader. It's the only area of science that Cambridge looks up to Norwich. In agri-tech, clean tech, some of the biomedical science, but particularly in agri-tech, got the world's biggest vertical farm, Lotus, Formula One powered Lotus on low-carbon biofuel made by genetically modified bugs. Amazing. But the Cambridge-Norwich link is a 2-carriage chuff-chuff which goes at 55 miles an hour through Dad's army country. They're 1965 trains. I mean, it's a joke, except it's not very funny. Successive governments have tried to stop that line. They call it a regional branch line. Mm-hmm. When I was Minister for Innovation Transport, we got the Oxford-Cambridge Railway through, and I extended it through to Norwich and Ipswich. Because it's the Innovation Express. And people in Cambridge don't go to Oxford by car. I mean, why would you? They want to go on a train. And so to me, there's something very significant about infrastructure. I mean, we've dualled the A11, which means you can race into the Cambridge traffic jam much more quickly and sit in it being unproductive. People want to be on a train with a laptop, and they don't care if it's 10 or 15 minutes extra. You can work. So the the infrastructure piece is key. So I think there's a cluster there. Cambridge works, or did work, when you could walk around it, cycle around it, get to see everybody quickly, drop your kids off at school and pick them up. A lot of the angels in Cambridge won't invest beyond 40 minutes to school gate.
Yeah.
But the Cambridge-Norwich cluster should be a world powerhouse, and it's not working.
And is it the case, just to be blunt about it, that you are getting coordination with the industrial strategy, the innovation plans that you've got, and investment from transport and treasury?
So I think this is one of the hardest bits. I think a lot of the things that are holding back clusters are infrastructure, digital infrastructure. I think Joe completely right. If we digital infrastructure, rail, road, and I say this having been the Minister of State at Department of Transport, we're locked into a very public sector model of quite slow procurement. We used to do boom and bust in infrastructure, and now Highways England and Network Rail build very slowly at the same rate across. So I think if I and Hermann Hauser, by the way, the only person in Britain to start 11 companies all worth over $1 billion, came here as a German student, just making the point. I think if Hermann Hauser and I and a few others went to the Middle East, we could probably raise $2 billion for a Norwich-Cambridge infrastructure bond to turn the 5 railway stations into 5G business units with a decent cafe, a Tortoise outreach hub. And people could then, you'd create an innovation economy in the East. I don't think raising that money is hard. And Jerry Grimstone, our Inward Investment Minister, would say that the world is awash with money wanting to come and invest in UK infrastructure. How? We've made it really hard.
By decentralising some of the decision-making in the Treasury.
Right. So I'd like to have I've written widely about this, regeneration infrastructure bonds, and allow people, regeneration corporations, planning permission. You could buy the 5 railway stations down that line. They're going really cheap. And by the way, no one even knows who owns the land. Network Rail own a bit, the train operating company owns a bit, the council owns a bit, Network Rail dump sidings. I mean, it's land going for nothing. Mm-hmm. And you could do a huge net, land value capture gain, buy the land down it for, I don't know, a quarter of $200 million, and turn it over 5 years into something incredibly exciting, worth $1 billion. And guess what? Let the users of the railway have a share in it. So I think the only way we're really going to unlock an innovation economy is not top-down from the traditional model of Treasury allocating money to bids, but a profound change in allowing local leaders to create innovative models of private sector-led investment that we can help.
So Matthew, I hope it's okay. Can we do the homicide cluster? Just because it might be an example for all of us then to be able to talk about, well, what works and what doesn't work.
Totally. Yeah, very happy to do that, James. I think, like George, we've been touring around the country, and just to firstly answer the question about, what are some of the success factors that we begin to identify, I think the starting point is you need that shared economic goal behind companies about what you're trying to get to. Some anchor institutions are really helpful. They might be the larger businesses. It could be sort of some of the universities and academia in a given place. And storytelling is so important as well. So you're able to tell government, the media, investors, people you're trying to attract to work there, what is the thing that you're all about and what is the thing that makes you unique? We've seen in places sometimes the go-to figurehead is really important. The role of regional mayors can be a differentiating factor for many in terms of pulling in some of that investment. And you tend to see really great partner collaboration going on with actually a pretty supportive policy environment. So look, those are the generic success factors so far. It'd be great to get people's views on those. Have we got those about right? Have we missed any? Have we got any wrong? And so on. But then to illustrate that within the cluster in Humber, what we're trying to do there. We've got this partnership we've identified with Zero Carbon Humber. It's a brilliant thing in its own right, highly ambitious, trying to get a carbon capture pipeline that essentially is going to capture round about half the UK's industrial emissions. That is brilliant in its own right. So if we can get behind that, that is all well and good. But we're also interested in the learnings from it as well. And George, you rightly said, there's always something here that actually is holding these things back as well. And that is actually what equally attracted us to this area. There's brilliant things going on. What is really good about it, I think, is it's got a combination of sort of new jobs from the really exciting new technologies that are going to be there, but also it helps to maintain the existing jobs in some of those high energy intensive emitting industries that already exist here. So there's a bit of a win-win going on there. But then in terms of the challenges, there are a couple that we identified where we felt the CBI could really help with. One of those is around the storytelling of a place. It's a crowded landscape and it's a complex because we're trying new stuff. So look, we've got zero carbon Humber going on, and some of the partners in the room here, it'd be great to get them to articulate a bit of that. But they are working really closely with their sister cluster in Teesside as part of a broader East Coast cluster play. Really important we understand that, because one without the other doesn't quite work in the same way. You've got a bit of a 2 + 2 = 5 effect going on there if we get it right. And also, there's lots of other exciting stuff going on in the Humber too, driven under the umbrella of the Opportunity Humber. So look, Zero Carbon Humber is a brilliant decarbonisation play from a green agenda, but we've also got other parts of the economy, a strong rural economy. We've got brilliant trading opportunities with the Freeport taking place there as well. So look, that storytelling is a really important part of what we're trying to fix. And then secondly, I think, they were looking for help in shifting the policy dial because it's new, it's ambitious, people are putting investment into it. They need to be sure and maintain the confidence that government policy is moving hand in glove with it along the way, so that when we say, look, we're ready to advance to the next stage, the supporting policy is there in behind it. So loads of brilliant things going on, but also a couple of things that we're trying to work with them together on to crack. And that, I think, James, is where we can really bring some power to bear on this cluster idea.
Well, there's going to be an irony that's not lost on people, which is we're having this conversation in London and we're talking about how you transform the whole of the UK, but we've got a number of people who are online, so I'm going to hope that some of them can join us. I don't know whether Simon Noakes is there. I think Simon.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, Simon, okay, look at that. It's working. Simon, what do you make of this? And if you can you just give us a little bit of the kind of Greater Manchester view on this, whether or not, and sorry to be quite so pointed about it, whether or not this is a kind of piece of central planning / wishful thinking?
Being direct in that sense, absolutely not. I mean, we have got a real view and a really clear view that actually what we're trying to do in Greater Manchester, working with the accelerator, but sort of wider than that, we've got a plan which we call Innovation Greater Manchester, and that plan is all about how you drive innovation-led economic growth across the whole of our conurbation. We've got some real strengths, particularly around, obviously, advanced materials, 2D materials, and manufacturing, and also around health innovation. But what we want to do is to use those clusters and use those strengths in a sort of way that's being described, but to create the ecosystem where actually you end up with productive businesses across the whole of the conurbation. And we're particularly interested in the sort of links between various different parts of our conurbation. So we've got the University of Manchester, for example, working with a strategic site in the Rochdale Berry area, and looking at how they can drive advanced materials activity into that site. And we want also to work in our key towns and think about how you will drive that innovation adoption to genuinely, create innovation-led economic growth in all of our towns. Partly, as I say, that's about specialist facilities, but it's far wider than that as well. And we've created this. It's been mentioned already, but the kind of ecosystem is hugely important in driving that, in our view. So yes, you've got these specialist facilities, but that ecosystem around infrastructure that's already mentioned, around skills, around finance, and around sustainable growth. So absolutely, the things that have been mentioned so far, to me, are spot on. And as I say, that phrase, we've obviously had strengths in certain parts of our conurbation in the past. Our plan now is to say driving innovation-led economic growth in all parts of our conurbation, and that we believe, working with the accelerator, is really exciting.
Simon, thank you. George, can we just get one of the questions that's kind of come up again and again in preparing for this and these conversations is who decides? If we're in Cheltenham in a couple of weeks' time and they say, look, we want to create a crypto cluster, who decides whether that happens? Do you decide? Do Cheltenham business people decide? Who's going to make that happen?
Okay, so I mean, the point about clusters is they emerge through millions of choices and decisions by people. So we're not designating, this will be a cluster. the approach I'm trying to take is to look and say, well, hang on, there are these clusters that are emerging. We need to support them and nurture them. And interestingly, in fact, on Thursday, I'm going Cheltenham, South Wales, and there is something very interesting in that corridor, sort of Bristol Gateway, the CCHQ, the Cheltenham cluster, down to Bristol and across to South Wales. And it's very odd. It's not UKRI funded, it's not something government has created, but it's happening. There is a really advanced computing corridor through there. So these things evolve naturally. We've only picked 30 because there are 30 that you can easily map. They're there, they're growing. But ultimately, I think there are probably 40, probably 50, and there are others that'll come. I just want to pick up. I was going to call you Tony. Sorry, Matthew's point about branding. It's really important. So I went to Bio Yorkshire the other day. Where's Bio Yorkshire? I didn't know, but there's a wonderful cluster of stuff coming out of York around the East Yorkshire. It hasn't got a boundary, but there's a concentration of technologies in food science, in plant science, in net zero clothing using artificial fabrics made from vegetables and linked. So it's an agri-tech, plant science, materials thing. And it's just emerged. It's completely not branded. If you went around the world and said, do you know about Bio Yorkshire? People would say, I never heard of it. So part of what we're trying to do is give these places names, identities, colours, shapes on the map, so that people who say, I really want to invest in plant science, you go, okay, Norwich, Bio Yorkshire, so they have an identity.
But what you're saying is the government is not planning to seed clusters, they're planning to observe clusters and then enable them to grow.
Yeah.
Okay. Stephanie Hyde, can I come to you for a moment? Stephanie's the UK CEO of JLL, but for our purposes, even more importantly, has been tasked by the good people at CBI to try and bring together, I think, both businesses, but also others in government and elsewhere to try and think through how to make this happen. I mean, just listening to the conversation so far, Stephanie, what do you hear from the companies that you started talking to about what needs to happen to make this clusters policy a success?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the most common questions I've been asked since I took on chairing the Thriving Regions and Nations Steering Committee is what's different this time? We've been talking about levelling up. We've been talking about getting better balance across the UK for many years. I think clustering is one of the most exciting things that will really drive this, and I think this is something that we should all focus on. I guess when we've been having these conversations and actually having these conversations with wider businesses, there's probably two things I'd add to what we've already discussed. I really would bring forward skills. Certainly, leading JLL, we're involved with advising lots of companies about where to invest and where they want to make their home. I hear time and time again that skills is the biggest factor, and clustering helps skills. When you've got these things appearing, it's because sort of that supply chain and downstream and upstream is sort of appearing. So skills is typically 75% of the decision as to where someone locates when we're going through that process. So big important piece that I think we have to get right, and that's another opportunity to do more on. And certainly that came through in all the conversations we've had to date. I think one of the other challenges is we talked about financing there. And when I talk to investors, there is a wall of capital that people are looking to invest. And we obviously are focused at JLL in terms of places and spaces that people want to live, work and play in. So there's no shortage of capital, and I completely agree. It's about how do you pull them together. What I think is a real challenge is the confidence that investors want in making that decision. And if you use King's Cross as an example, 7 years, I think, to get through planning. If you use Canary Wharf, it's similar, years and years of that. Canada Water, again, 6, 7, 9 years of planning. And even if you look at, I was at Canary Wharf today, and they've got this amazing life sciences investment ready and waiting. That's probably 4 years of planning to get through. So I think actually bringing people together to focus on what can be done quickly and get through the red tape is massively important, because the money's there.
George, do you want to just answer that? There's the planning point, but on skills, in fact, one of the CBI at 10 conversations we had just after the budget, well, after the spring statement, I think it was, Stephanie, You know, one of the questions around this is that there's such an energy, we can hear it from you, around clusters policy, but when it comes to the investment needed to do something around skills and further education, the money's just not there. And I just wonder what you do inside government to say, look, we can talk the talk, but unless we walk the walk, it's not going to count for much. What do you do on the funding on the skills side?
Yeah. So on Friday, last Friday, I went up to Northumbria University, I'm old enough to remember it as a poly, as was. And talk about an exemplar of the polytechnic to university model. Northumbria has gone up the research ratings from 45 to 27 to, it's going to be shortly published. I'm probably breaking their embargo, but they are breaking into the Russell. I mean, they're getting close to Russell Group. And that's not deep bioscience, that's industrial, advanced manufacturing, County Durham. And recently I went up to see Cromec, fastest growing company in the County Durham cluster. And the head of technology, I said, tell me about your career. I think he'd say Stanford, Cambridge. He said, no, I did my first degree at Northumbria. Then I went to Quantum DX and went back and did my industrial degree. And then I got headhunted by Cromec. He's never left the Northeast. And his skills have been nurtured in the Northeast. What was disappointing was when I sat down with the county council and said, have you asked the 50 companies on NetPark what their skills growth in the next 5-10 years will be, and just built that into the FE? They said no. Weird gap, because that's really simple. Michelle Donnellan at DFE is one of my R&D ministers in the interministerial group. She's doing brilliant work on tackling the skills for industrial clustering. And actually there are places like Northumbria is going really well, Liverpool's doing some good work. I think the honest truth is we slightly raided the FE budget for some of the apprenticeship stuff in the coalition. And we're now repairing that with a proper career path, T-levels, proper apprenticeships, and proper industrial FE. I think it's a better story than it sounds, actually. But again, that's an area where I think a lot of industry, if we made it easy, would help pay for some of the skills of tomorrow. A lot of industry is saying to us, it's skills shortages, Minister, that are holding us back. Well, let's do it together.
I would agree, but I think it's also the conversation on it happening, because we need to be in step with where the skills are heading to keep ahead of it. And in those clusters, if we can make skills a part where public and private can come together to have that conversation, not just necessarily about the finances, but about what's needed, I think you get an acceleration of the cluster.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think I remember the point that you made that morning was the investment will pay itself back over the course of the decade in growth, which is, I guess, the point. And just for people to know that on skills, I think the next thinking that we do on this is actually focused on skills. The one that Hashi's hosting in Cheltenham will be on that subject. I want to bring in just John Godfrey, if I might, from Legal and General, just on the point about that wall of money. He's online, so yeah, you can do that. Thanks, Stephanie. But for those people who are not operating or have got so used to operating in a digital newsroom, I just want you to know that the way we're operating here is through an exciting technology called putting your hand up. So if you'd like to, I'm going to come to you in a moment, ma'am. Let me just bring in John Godfrey, and then I'm going to come to you.
Yes, thanks very much, James, and excellent discussion so far. I'd want to throw in a couple of observations. I mean, the first thing is that Legal and General, we've invested about 33 billion in towns and cities outside of London in the UK, and much of it is driven by the desire to support and create clusters. The point George makes is absolutely right, that we need to allow local leaders to innovate with private capital. There is a huge amount of private capital around. The point's been made. We need some regulatory changes to enable pension funds to invest more into startups and particularly scale-ups, because the structural problem we have in the UK is we have brilliant science, great universities, pretty entrepreneurial. We start lots of companies and then we fail to bring them up to sort of maturity. And the money that is coming in from overseas, there is a lot of it, a wall of capital. We will end up with a lot of these owned by overseas players, and quite often location eventually follows the money. So we will lose the companies when they start to become grown-ups. A couple of other observations, if I may. First, where we have invested most successfully, it's been built around a partnership model. So you get a good local partnership with a university as an anchor institution. You get a local council, one of the good dynamic ones with a strong chief executive, a strong political leadership as well, and you work together for the long term, which sometimes means you have to take a slightly longer view than the normal approach to procurement. And so there's a few changes could be made there. And I do think that in order to encourage more of that type of thing, probably the next round of devolution and city deals could quite easily have an element of conditionality where City X will get its 30 or 50 million quid, but they will have to leverage up from that by attracting the same amount or twice the amount or whatever the right number is from the private sector. So you have a sort of explicit gearing with private sector money coming in. I think that's important. The last point, I think, really is very supportive of this argument that's been made about successful. You can't have the same cluster everywhere. You know, not every county town needs a life science park. So pick the local expertise and build on it. I mean, Newcastle is good at many things, but one of them is the science of aging. You know, that is a growth area. George mentioned crypto and Cheltenham, Gloucester, Herefordshire, that sort of cybersecurity corridor. So we need to find those things, and then we need to support them also with the right type of digital and physical infrastructure. So the right buildings, the right labs, the right kind of specialist infrastructure that they need. And, you know, just to finish with one example, I mean, Alderley Park in Cheshire, formerly AstraZeneca's research hub, which we are an owner of, now has over 200 startups and scale-ups, mainly life science companies based there. And there will be housing so that their employees can live locally as well. So you have to take this kind of holistic approach to making the right living environment as well. So I'll stop there, James, and
John,
a few thoughts.
Terrific, and I'm going to try and pick up on a few. I don't know whether Ben Morgan's here, and I don't know whether Andy Williams actually is here somewhere. Oh, there's Andy Williams. John, just before we lose you, can I just ask one question? You know your point right at the beginning about saying, look, we have to be able to allow some of those funds, those pension funds, into investment in clusters, making that easier. But you know, I mentioned right at the beginning William Hague's piece today. There was one of all the paragraphs, George, you'll agree, that were kind of enthusiastic. There was one that was specific, and it said, and I just wanted to put this to you, John. On capital, this is William Hague, being the reigning monarch. On capital, my ministers will unlock flows of funds that help start-up companies to scale up rather than need foreign takeovers in order to grow globally. They will follow the recent announcements of departing from EU rules for insurance companies with deciding to let defined contribution pension funds invest a proportion of their money in private companies and riskier but potentially more profitable assets. I imagine that you're in favour of that. I just want to understand what that means.
Well, what that means essentially is that there is a change to the Solvency II rules, which apply to insurance investments and long-term investments of annuity funds and things like that, which makes it quite difficult to invest in newer types of asset class. So quite a lot of climate assets, for example, are quite difficult to invest in with that pot of money. But the pension point is slightly different, and that is less an EU rule and more a rule about something called permitted links, and also about fee caps. So what you find, ironically, in defined contribution pensions, workplace pensions, is that if you invest in something that is a startup where there is a performance fee for investing in it, if that performs fantastically well, the trustees of the pension scheme will inadvertently break the law by exceeding the fee cap, even though they've generated extra value for their ultimate pensioners. But you know, the key thing here is not that the industry is arguing for a sort of bonfire of all regulation and go mad with startups. It's really only talking about 3 to 5% maximum of a very spread out de-risked portfolio.
Yeah, totally in favour. John's basically written the book on this, and the good news is we're doing it. The Chancellor and John Glenn, the City Minister, are 3/4 of the way through a very focused piece of work, working their way through the 7 or 8 regulatory changes. And I've put together a life science scale-up task force preparing to pile in behind that and raise money in London. And I'm told all those regulatory barriers should be cleared by end of this calendar, if not financial year. So watch for the boom. I mean, we ought to be. NASDAQ shut down. With those reforms in place, we should be able to raise a lot of money in London.
Okay, George, thank you. Well, would you pass it? And forgive me, would you introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hello there, Rosa Wilkinson from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Absolutely great comments so far. I was really struck by the Minister's description of what constitutes a cluster. So a place where people take risks for opportunities. And I think that for me tells me that we've got to get better and better at saying where those opportunities are, so that we can enthuse not just the new businesses that we want to set up here within the UK and that are spinning out of our universities, but also the existing communities. Because what I know from past lives where I've seen some of this happening before is that clusters are most likely to thrive where the people within them are genuinely confident and where they are building on existing strengths. I do sometimes worry that some of the funds that we are seeing being created as part of the levelling up agenda will inspire some locations to say, oh, we can become world leaders in X, when that is absolute balderdash, or another word beginning with B. It's something that we've got to watch out for. I'd like to pick up two on the skills point. There is a danger that skills are focused on today's skills. And actually, if we want our clusters to thrive, we've got to have the foresight about where the opportunities will be, not tomorrow, not next year, but in 5 years' time, and make sure that we are ready to provide the workforce that is capable of seizing them. I'm proud that my organisation, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, is working with DFE on their emerging skills pilot, which is exactly where we need to be. Let's look ahead, not just at tomorrow.
Rose, thank you. And do you mind me just asking, just because I think if you think about the sort of history of clustering and the history of the relationship between science and capital, we've often looked to the pharmaceutical industry to kind of help us understand skills issues, geography issues, relationship with universities. How does AstraZeneca see this? What would they like to see the government do on clustering?
So Andy Williams from AstraZeneca. I think we're the model poster child of doing a cluster badly and then doing a cluster well. Well, John referred to it. So at Audley Park, it wasn't the greatest thing leaving Audley Park when the Chancellor of the Exchequer was the local MP. That wasn't great. That was George Osborne. When we exited Audley Park, it was mainly because we did not have a cluster narrative for Audley Park. Now, at least to our credit, we did leave 5 million in seed investment in there because we wanted to leave a legacy. And part of Audley Park's regeneration was because we left that legacy there. And what happened instead was the local environment developed their own narrative and got excited, and the ecosystem developed its own opportunity. So Audley Park is now, ironically, a thriving cluster, as is Cambridge, where we took our R&D facilities to afterwards. And so I'm still going to use it to ask my question, which I was going to ask anyway. I think what we need from a cluster perspective is authentic narratives. Now, authentic narratives, and I think George referred to it, it has to come from the locality. I think local ecosystems have to develop their own narrative. Ideally, it should not be based on geography. It should be based on an economic cluster. That can be a challenge within the system that we work in. But the other element of an authentic narrative we need to think about is it really globally competitive, which I think is what you're saying as well. So there's an element of local areas coming with an authentic narrative, and I'll be interested to hear from the Minister, actually others, how are we going to validate those against globally competitive? So when you work in a global organisation like AstraZeneca, I very quickly know when I've put forward a value proposition for the UK which isn't globally competitive, because it gets kicked out very quickly. It's very easy within a global company to do that. How do we do that as a country? Because I worry that we may invest in areas which we hear from the local narrative is globally competitive, but actually isn't.
George, do you want to address that? I'm going to come to you on it too, Matt.
Yeah, great question. Just on the Alderley point, actually, because it is the poster child. We had the same in Sandwich in Kent when Pfizer moved, and AZ in Charnwood. And I set up a thing called the Life Science Opportunity Zone. No money, but we designated places as growth hubs, gave them fast-track planning permission. AZ put a bit of money into Alderley, and Pfizer did the same. And they're actually poster child for how you can turn an old facility into an incubator. On the point about excellence, it's a really good point, and there is a danger of local places saying we're going to be a life science cluster when I know they're not. And so it's partly research. You can assess whether the research is excellent. There are lots of metrics for that. And it's not always golden triangle, hence my point about Northumbria. It's now becoming world-class in advanced manufacturing. So there's research excellence. Then we're building into the metrics, and this is live work with the CBI helping us, so I'm here today to get your thoughts. How do you check whether an innovation cluster is really world-class? And there's a bunch of metrics, I think. One is, how fast is it growing? I mean, is it attracting investment from both big and small? Because one big company making an announcement doesn't in itself make a cluster. And this is work in progress, actually. We're trying to map some basic metrics. But you also need to ask people internationally. And the best validation of that is an international leader in AI saying, that is a global cluster, believe me, because I could invest anywhere in the world. And if that's happening, then frankly, it's world-class.
Potential. It doesn't have to be a world-leading cluster, but we know it has the potential to be a world-leading cluster, because some areas don't currently have the capacity to be cluster size, but they may well have the potential, and that's another gap that we can look at as well.
Yeah, there is a skills point that it's really important that schools, primary schools, not of tomorrow, well, primary schools and their teachers are aware of what the jobs being created in their area are. If you went around the 500 primary schools in the Northeast, I have a horrible feeling, and asked the primary school teachers, are you aware of what's happening in this cluster? How many amazing jobs are being created? Look at the chart. They'd say no. They're still living a lived reality of a post-industrial Northeast decline. Well, unless we can change that narrative in primary schools and get children going, hey, I want to go and work in advanced manufacturing, that's quite a problem.
Matthew, can I just put something to you, which is, there will be some people, probably not in this room, because if you're here, you're probably interested, if not supportive of the idea, but there will be people in business, in communities, on the left and the right, who will be screaming at this conversation. On the right, there'll be people who say, look, I just hate the idea of a combination of the government and the CBI getting their heads together to try and organise the economy, right? We should let the market decide. And on the left, there will be people who say this whole clusters thing is brilliant at creating wealth, but not very good at creating jobs, right? It concentrates the wealth in too few hands. What's your answer to those two groups of critics?
Yeah, okay. Well, the first one is to say, I don't think we're in the business of trying to create something out of nothing, or say artificially we're going to put something down here and make this the next world-leading life sciences sector. That is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is get behind good things that are happening. So this is, Andy, when you were talking, in my mind, this is very much a good to great play. I think these places have probably got something good going on in a UK context, and they're holding their own on that. And where we're looking to do is say, actually, can we take that and make it great, by which we mean, is there something really interesting going on internationally on the world stage? That, I think, is the sort of transformational play we're looking to do. And I would say the difference between that and the CBI or government or anyone else trying to sort of artificially manoeuvre things around is this is about backing success and backing winners as opposed to picking them. So that will be my sort of answer to your first challenge, James. On the one about, is this genuinely creating jobs and so on? I think this authentic narrative and the local skills story is really, really important, because I think this, again, is the power of cluster. This is not just any individual companies acting in isolation. I think where you have supply chains going on, you're getting then a whole sort of series of related jobs and career opportunities springing up, where people could say, actually, that's something I could forge a career in. I can make my way here by doing that. And you're able to tell that story. It's where the authentic narrative kicks in, and the schools begin to hear that, the young people begin to hear that and say, actually, I don't need to move away. There's real opportunity springing up here, and I can get behind that. And then lo and behold, all of a sudden, you've got the schools, the colleges, the universities saying, actually, here's a group of businesses that I can talk to. They're able to articulate the future skills needs, not just the current skills needs, but we can build a pipeline of talent that can service it right here on our doorstep.
Okay. Sir, yes, and there's a lady and a gentleman there. So, Andy, would you just pass this lady right behind you, and I'll come to you, sir? Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Claire Harbord from Drax. I'm part of the East Coast Humber cluster.
and partners are in the room. Fantastic to see you, and great to see you, Minister, too, because I know you're a big fan of the Humber. So we have a fantastic winning opportunity in the Humber, as you have said, Matthew. Fantastic opportunity for new jobs, protect jobs, and really going back to John's point, we have an opportunity in the north for North Sea Technologies, a world-leading technology. And we must not lose that opportunity. At Drax, we're the biggest renewable generator in the UK, based in Yorkshire, really proud of our Yorkshire heritage, going back to the narrative. And we are desperate to get on with this project. And the barriers to that are regulatory frameworks. We've been trying to get this project off the ground for 10 years. And we don't want to miss this amazing prize and have this world-leading opportunity. We know that there's the capital there. We've talked about skills. These are barriers, but we are ready to invest like our partners. Give us the regulatory framework, and like the wind, like the wind farms, when they get those regulatory frameworks, they go. So we are keen to get on with it and keen to have that partnership with government and with Treasury, prioritise the winners, give these potential real winners in the UK, particularly in a world where with renewable energy, we've got to invest in it for the future with security supply, with the Ukrainian war, etc. There is more opportunity and reason to really get on and back these new renewable technologies and just get on with it.
Claire, will you just be just specific for a second? So who's going to draft that regulatory framework? How does that happen?
The frameworks are with BEIS. They're the development of the business models, which we've been waiting for a long, long time, and it is in partnership with the Treasury.
But is it stuck in BEIS or it's stuck in Treasury?
Both.
Okay, that's good. That's one for you, George. There's a gentleman behind you, yes.
Thank you.
I want my Director General.
Thank you for allowing me to say something quickly before I jump on my train back to County Durham. My name is Simon Ropes, and I'm managing partner of North East Capital. And we are a scale-up venture capital fund for the UK, but we're starting in the North East, where we've identified over 125 undercapitalized businesses desperate for scale-up finance, not startup finance, scale-up finance. And I just wanted to make the point that without finance like the scale-up finance, we'll continue to see what we've already seen in the northeast of England, and that is funds coming over from the US, from South Korea, and buying up businesses for a song, a disgrace really to see it happen. So we need to stop that by helping people like us. There are many people like us who are looking to raise scale-up funds to achieve that. One other final point, I was really pleased to hear about the discussion on skills. It's amazing how when businesses are properly financed, how they're able to get the skills that they need. And that's not meant to be a smart-ass remark, but it's just true. If you fund businesses properly, they can attract skills from outside of the region, which we need to do in the Northeast. We're not going to achieve what we're trying to achieve in the Northeast by ourselves.
And just out of interest, your point is you can get the very early stage VC funding, but not the scale-up funding?
Yeah, I mean, the Northeast has been on a public sector drip for startup capital for 20 years. Unfortunately, I think it was 15 years ago, 3i, who were able to invest in scale-up funding. They were the go-to, but they left, and there's been no scale-up fund in the Northeast ever since. There are some VCT type funds, but they're obviously very restricted on the amount of funds they can put in. So yeah, we just think it's about getting that scale-up piece, which I think I'm glad that everyone else has said that, and I'm not just sitting here pushing my own agenda, because it's quite clearly something that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. If you invest in a scale-up business, mm-hmm. as we're in the process of doing right now with an electric motor business in the northeast of England, which has 30 staff. If it gets the funding we're trying to get into it, it'll go to 60 next year and 90 the year after. Yeah. If that was a startup business, you might go to 2 to 4 to 6 over the same. Now, I'm not an anti-startup guy. I've managed startup funds, hugely important, but you've got to have that bridge. You've got to have that, the baton's got to be handed to the scale-up funds. Otherwise, as someone has commented here, they either die or they become zombie businesses / lifestyle businesses, or they just give up.
Did you say, I didn't hear your name?
Simon Robeson.
From is it called
Northeast
Capital? Yeah. Jo, can I just ask you a question just in response to what Simon's saying? When I imagine that, Virgin Media O2 Business, I'm hoping there's a big screen and you can look at the kind of dynamism and movement of your customer base. Do you recognise what Simon's saying in the sense that just access to capital and therefore scale is just very disproportionately southeast? I mean, and if so, how much is it a connectivity problem? How much is it a capital problem?
It's an interesting question. We don't necessarily get data on the access to capital, but we certainly see and we have visibility of quite different connectivity levels and connectivity challenges in different parts of the country. I think one of the things, actually drawing on a few points that's been made, that we have seen work really well is taking that really regional approach. So it was great to see Stephen from GMCA, for example, because we've been working with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority on one of their local full fibre network projects, where we've been helping connect lots of sites, whether that's community centres, homeless shelters and things like that. And I think it's a great example of where in a region you can bring together public policy, private capital, and if you can set it up in the right way and get that ecosystem working, you can really drive benefit. And I think just in the first year, that's driven nearly £12 million of economic benefit in the region.
So when you look also at just the connectivity problem, right, because, we talked about the chuff train, in connectivity terms, where are you seeing those communities or those clusters that you feel are sort of blocked off from potential growth?
And it probably varies a bit depending on whether you're talking about fixed or mobile connectivity. We've committed to expanding our fixed connectivity and building full fibre across our full network over the next few years, which will make a big difference. On the mobile side is obviously more challenging in rural areas. So how do you get connectivity in an economically viable way to people who live in really rural areas and build out to them? And again, I think initiatives like a shared rural network, where the operators have worked together with government to find a way, how do we share our capabilities in those areas so that rather than all of us build, we can share the infrastructure and the investment to provide the capability is a good example.
Thank you. So you're going to make one point, and I'm going to bring in Louis O'Halloran, and then I'm going to invite all just to conclude. Sir.
Thanks so much.
Oh, sorry, so before you speak, yes.
Thank you very much.
Subtly branded.
George, you introduced not very long ago.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, I'm David Crichton-Miller of Oxford Innovation and SQW, and George introduced a report on the Oxford Innovation Cluster not very long ago. And not long after that, we did a report on the Bath and Bristol Innovation Cluster. And one of the common denominators, which we haven't really talked about quite as much as I thought we might, was the sort of significant role of a nice coalition of senior people from business, local government, universities. Manchester has been a great beneficiary of aligning all its parties together. We spent quite a lot of this conversation talking about great places doing even better. And I feel like that's one of your themes, not very good places trying to become good. So I'm going to ask you about that at the end. But in the, great places getting even better, I think that you've alighted on quite a number of things you might do to lubricate those places even more. I just suggest, this suits sort of large city regions, doesn't it? It suits a planning environment and a sort of scale environment that's pretty big, not districts, not even really counties. You've got to get, your northern parts of your Cambridge and Peterborough together, haven't you, with the bits that are already going really well. So my question was really, what are the interventions you're thinking about for those places that are sort of not particularly great to help them get better, or are we giving up on them?
George, do you want to respond?
Absolutely not giving up on them. I know East Anglia well, so let me tell. The weird thing about East Anglia is you've got Cambridge, fastest growing city in Europe, and not half an hour away, drugs and deprivation. You've got serious hardcore heroin addiction in the Fens. Peterborough's getting better, but Wisbech, Kings Lynn, Cromer, Yarmouth, all the way around the coast, real pockets of serious deprivation, every bit as bad as you have in the north. And in my constituency, halfway between Cambridge and Norwich, you've heard me say this, it should be an innovation constituency. It's a rural backwater, 114 villages, very poor digital connectivity, and a terrible railway line and very heavy car dependence. So my answer to that is you have to have clusters of opportunity and growth. Not everywhere can be a cluster. And then the key is connectivity. And in my area, that would be digital connectivity. The single biggest impact we could make to help those poor deprived communities dependent on state handouts because they're disconnected from the growth would be digital connectivity. Fast train would help. I mean, Yarmouth is probably not going to be a life science cluster. It's becoming a very powerful energy, offshore wind energy hub. But if those communities could get to the growth areas more quickly, you'd see them flourishing and creating ancillary and support businesses. So absolutely, places can't be left behind. So my model is clusters of real growth and then much better digital and physical connectivity to them, to John's point about connectivity.
George, I said I'd bring in Louis O'Halloran just because he's got one particular point about what happens when you get excluded. Can I just see if Louis is there, just to make a point on Liverpool? Are you there, Louis?
Hi, yes, I'm here. So I work on the Secretariat of the Liverpool City Region APPG. Now, obviously, in the Levelling Up White Paper, there are a few different innovation accelerators announced. There's Greater Manchester, West Midlands and Glasgow. And you could somewhat see there being some sort of winners and losers in who is getting access to innovation accelerators. So I was just wondering sort of why Liverpool was overlooked and what places like Liverpool can do to become sort of innovation accelerators. And I just see they announced sort of last week the innovation prospectus. So it'd be quite interesting to see whether George has got around to reading that and whether there's any sort of scope for widening those accelerators.
Louis, thank you. George?
Yeah, it's a great question. We agonised over the 100 million for 3 accelerators. Should we do 30 accelerators at 10 million? Or, 300 at 1 million? Or 100 at 3... And in the end, we've gone for 3 because we wanted to make a big difference. We wanted, and the criteria for those, by the way, is places where there is an existing pocket of genuinely world-class innovation. And the funding is to do 3 things: grow the profile and the world-class reach and investment of that area, grow the spread out to touch marginalised communities that are left behind. So they're each picked because they've got growth hubs next to marginalised communities. And thirdly, to drive the rate of local company creation. So those are the criteria. Did we get it right? I don't know. But we've picked 3 places that have got real growth outside the Golden Triangle, next cheek by jowl to deprivation. So that was the logic behind it. The whole point of my 30 cluster mapping is to highlight where the other 27 are and to work out how we leverage in that private finance. And the key number I should have said at the beginning, to get to a 2.4% R&D economy, 30 billion extra public, we've got to unlock 100 billion extra private in the next 6 years. And to John Godfrey's point, I think those clusters, if we map them, brand them, support them properly, can attract a lot of that.
George, thank you. So I'm aware now, of course it always happens like this. There are a whole bunch of people who've got points to make. My suggestion is, if it's all right, I'm going to try to wrap up so that people can sort of talk directly to George and Jo and Matthew just when we finish. We've got sort of 10, 15 minutes just to come and talk in the room rather than in this rather more formal setting. So I want to say thank you to Jo, say thank you to George. I'm going to hand over to Matthew to say what happens next. Just to let you know, the way our thinkings work is we try to step away from the whole conversation and think, okay, what do we need to do? We'll take some notes from this. Actually, first and foremost, I'm really encouraged by the idea that we're not just looking at an idea of a cluster as a place to work, but as a place to live. I love your original definition, George, of a place that you move to with your family that's low risk to do something that's high risk. I was reminded that Mike Bloomberg said that London would thrive post-Brexit, whatever the vote, because of the parks, museums and schools. There's a reason we should think about that when it comes to clusters. But I think we will take away the point, Jo, that you made at the start, and I guess, Andy, you were making about verification, which is how do we look at data so we understand where the clusters are, but whether or not they genuinely are succeeding. We will certainly take away the point that came up, and you just referred to, George, around capital, both kind of the John Godfrey, what sources of capital can go into private enterprise in the UK, but also Simon Robeson's point about where it lands, that scale-up point. Stephanie, I know this is the front of mind for you, skills, and Rosa, your point about what kind of skills, we'll definitely make sure we look at that, and certainly that's something that will come up in Cheltenham. And I suppose the thing that you won't be surprised to hear is that if you're interested in stories, the idea that the one thread that comes through the whole conversation today is what are the narratives of these different places. We'll keep, I suppose, coming back to that, and it's a point I know that you started with. So, Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you to sort of say what next from the CBI's point of view and what next on this project.
Brilliant. Well, look, thanks, James, and thanks, everybody, for a brilliant sort of kick-off and some fantastic insights. Let me just pick up a few of those closing remarks and then on to what happens next. The sort of places that are not within these clusters, or the places that feel they've missed out, for example. Look, Clusters isn't the only game in town. I think for those, there are some really important issues. We're very, very aware that actually there's a lot of talk about the disparity between regions, but equally important is the disparity within regions. And I think, look, investment in infrastructure, be it physical or digital, investment in skills and so on, those are really, really important for those areas. Then, James, I think it comes on to the point around storytelling and the authentic narrative. How do you actually make sure that people are paying attention to you and you're on the map for next time round? I think it is having a compelling story about actually why something really interesting is going on in this place and you need to be part of the agenda. And then, Andy, I just wanted to come back to your challenge about how do we know if we're onto something that's a good to great story? And for me, a few of the tests would include, look, is it attracting international investment, not just UK? Is it actually attracting international talent because there's something interesting going on here that the best minds want to come and work on? And also, I think, where is it selling to? Is it not just selling to within the UK, but is this a success story that we're exporting and selling right around the world? Those would be some of my criteria. James, to finish in terms of what next, I mean, look, I am both sort of cheered and relieved that people in the room feel that we're onto something here. I don't think I'd be too popular if I reported back to Tony that it was a big thumbs down kind of thing. So that is really encouraging. But I think a couple of things next. One is, as we've done this afternoon, if people can help us identify those success criteria, what makes it sing and so on, so that we can capture and replicate all of that, that will be really helpful. But equally, do tell us if you're running up against barriers and challenges, because I think we can help on that in a couple of ways. One is the CBI are brilliant conveners, so it might be that in your particular location or your particular cluster, you've got a challenge. We might be able to connect you up with other people in other parts of the country that have had that challenge and they've found a way to overcome it, so we can crack it that way. Or if not, George, I'm very confident that we'll be knocking on your door to say, look, we've identified these pieces, we need them fixed, can you help us get onto it? So that is how we're planning on tackling it, and we look forward to carrying on the conversation.
Thank you very much. We also just say thank you to Matthew Fair, to Jo Bertram and to George Freeman.